Good afternoon to you all, and very welcome. My name is Marlies Henderson. As a quick introduction, I was born and raised in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, we speak Dutch. Sometimes it's called Holland, but nether is from like low, hall is hollow. We're lowlands. The only reason Netherlands exists, it's one big delta from several rivers. There used to be water, and then the sand got carried from the rivers, and then people thought of making dikes, and then there was more land, and so that's where I'm from. We'll just make land. I moved to Billerica in 1997, 27 years ago. I married Brian Henderson, who was born and raised right here in Billerica, 54 River Street at the intersection with Parker, at the corner, right by the railroad. Henry David Thoreau, the one I'm going to be talking about, only lived 44 years. He spent, so we talked about me, now we're talking about Henry. He's a little faded here, the slide is not the best. He only lived 44 years. He spent 2 years and 2 months by Walden Pond. All his fame seems to be Walden Pond. Everybody relates Henry David Thoreau to Walden Pond, but most of the time he was on the rivers, Assabet, Sudbury, Concord rivers. In the winter he skated, in the summer he boated. His journal entries prove that. I'm not just making that up. As a matter of fact, he moved to Walden Pond to write his book A Week on the Concord and Merrimack Rivers. He spent a lot more time than a week, but he wrote the book A Week, which was to remember his brother. His brother John joined him on a trip, and this is still not... no, let me just get to the next slide to remember that my first introduction with Henry David Thoreau was not in America. It was in the Netherlands, and I wasn't in the Netherlands in 1905. But in high school, which is still a very long time ago, in the 70s, I had Dutch literature, and there was a poet, Frederik van Ede, and he started a commune. And the commune was called Walden, inspired by Henry David Thoreau. And it was a bunch of intellectuals who were going to go back to nature. And instead of a little cabin like Henry David Thoreau, they had this nice mansion where they could write poetry, and they were going to run a farm and be self-sufficient. This started in 1898, and it was completely failed by 1907. But this is when they were still trying hard to run their farm, being intellectuals. They starved themselves to death. But Walden, that's when the first time when I was introduced as a teenager with Henry David Thoreau. It didn't get me interested. I just had to memorize it. When I met Brian years later, in '83, he took me on a date to Walden Pond. This was 1983, and there were no fences around the pond yet. But he took me on a date, so that's where everything connects, you know? And then in 2019, I gave this talk about Thoreau in Billerica for the Thoreau Gathering in Concord. So I was really on their schedule, and I'm there in a little photo with my raccoon hat, my roadkill hat. The roadkill, it's certified accidental fur. This is a raccoon, from where I know, where in Vermont he got hit by a car, and he was skinned, and later on the hat was made out of it. So that's all real. But having to give this talk, it was an honor to do it. The talk was well attended. Here's me during the talk. I have different glasses. The man looks at me like I'm a nutcase, which maybe I am. And note the slide, you're getting the same presentation. I didn't have to do much. It's still there in my computer. That is Fox Island. We'll get to it where it is exactly. the spot. I've always been very outdoorsy, and I raise awareness of the open space that we have in Billerica. I'm only interested really in Billerica. Just that's because Brian says I shouldn't spread myself too thin. So I've said, you know, I'm just going to limit myself to Billerica. And there's a lot of open space in Billerica, and I like to raise the awareness of it. And when you tell about history, that's when people start to like open space more, because there's so much history connected to it. So I do paddle programs and walks, and then with local history. So in this photo, I was guiding about 60 people. 60 is too much. This is years ago when I just put out that I was going to do a Middlesex Canal walk, a guided walk, and it was along the Thoreau path, because Henry David Thoreau was really in Billerica, came down the river, and because he didn't want to go over the falls, he used the canal to circumvent the falls, and then this is the towpath by the canal. And there were so many people that showed up, which is nice for a photo, but not really nice to join that walk. So between 3A and Brickhiln Road in North Billerica is a towpath along a canal. So rather than having to guide these groups forever and tell them again and again the same story, which I do it, you know, I love doing this, talking about Billerica, but I also thought I'm going to put an interpretive sign. And if you recall those high buildings on Route 3A, those new buildings, when that was permitted, I said to the man, I would talk to the historical groups in Billerica as long as we get an interpretive sign along the sidewalk. So he built the sidewalk and he paid for the interpretive sign. And then I just had to go to the select board and ask them to accept the municipal sign. And there is a small print of it there, but also the sign has the map of the canal, the Middlesex Canal, which has the highest point in Billerica. The Summit Pond is in Billerica, the Concord River. It's a strange thought, but that is the highest point. It goes down to the Merrimack and it goes down to the Charles River. And Billerica is the highest point because of the dam that we have. The red label says you are here. That is along Lowell Street, because this is where we look at the sign. Then it also has a little bit about a cross-section of the canal, where you see a towpath, 10-feet towpath on one side, and the other side is a berm. So it was a lot of it had to be dug in 10 years' time, because they got through an act. There was a charter, first a bill, then a charter, I think. And through an act, they got the right to build a canal. Other people had to fund it, not the state. The state needed a highway, which the canal was a good highway. You had a horse to pull a boat, and there were no trains yet. So you had the Middlesex Turnpike was an attempt to get highways, and the canals were an attempt to get highways. So you get a bunch of rich people who say, we want to build this, and the act would make sure that they could do it. And then they dug, or when they went through really wetlands, they had to build up berms on both sides. Because you couldn't have a connection with the outside water, and I'm sorry I'm talking about the Middlesex Canal, we'll get to Thoreau. You couldn't have a connection with the outside water with a river. They had to go over a river or build berms so you wouldn't be connected with Meadow Brook, because otherwise the canal would run empty or full. It had to be controlled level with a number of locks. I think it was 28, because you can't go down to Boston. Water will run out. So anyway, that's the canal, and the picture on the bottom left shows what those packet boats looked like. This one has merchandise on it. Could have been granite, could have been lumber, could have been vegetables from the farmers going north or south. And they also had passenger boats. And it took 8 hours to get from Boston to Middlesex Village, which is now Lowell, by the Merrimack. 8 hours. They couldn't go faster than 3.5 miles an hour because that would destroy the banks with a wake. Now, Henry David Thoreau, in comes Henry David Thoreau. He was on the canal, and I get the book itself. The week on the Concord and Merrimack Rivers is divided into chapters from Saturday to Sunday. Saturday, Sunday, Friday. Saturday to Friday. On Friday, he went back. Saturday afternoon, they started late because it was a rainy day. And then on Saturday, they camped in Billerica. But what did I want to say? I was going to say, he was on a boat. According to the regulations, it was too short. It was too narrow. They were on a Sunday. Then after, they started Saturday, camped in Billerica on Saturday, and then continued on. So on a Sunday, they used the canal. Well, it's not right, against the regulations. And then he also says that they, I think I can read it from here too. But now at length we heard this staid and primitive river rushing to her fall like any rill. We here left its channel just above the Billerica Falls and entered the canal, which runs, or rather is conducted, 6 miles through the woods to the Merrimack at Middlesex Village. And as we did not care to loiter in this part of our voyage, while one ran along the towpath drawing the boat by a cord, the other kept it off the shore with a pole, so that we accomplished the whole distance in little more than an hour. 6 miles an hour. That's where he says, we trespassed, we speeded. Ha ha. He doesn't say we speeded. He tells us we did 6 miles in an hour. So that's Henry David Thoreau for you in Billerica. But that's not all. That's just a little bit. We'll continue on my pictures to keep me on track. This is where we did the ribbon cutting done by the daughter of Andrew Delorier in 2018. She must be a teenager now. And I even had, for the ribbon cutting, I had a marching band kid do the drum roll. So if you put a little fanfare, then you draw attention. And it's all just helping the memories. Now back to Henry David Thoreau. This is a photo taken by Robert Thorson, or a photographer who did it for Robert Thorson. He wrote The Boatman, and it's all about Henry David Thoreau. And it also tells about the Billerica Dam, so that's why I read it. It's about Billerica. But this is a replica which is at the Concord Museum. It's not quite according to the description because the real one had wheels, because they could roll it from their house to the river. But it's the type of dory. It had a mast, it had sails, and this is by Fairhaven Bay. So that's not where they started. They started in Concord and then went downriver. So 1839 is when they did their trip. The book was published much later. Back to the sign, I have to say, when I was doing the research for this sign, I had to go to the Concord Museum to find evidence, this, that, and the other thing. And Alec Ingraham asked me, if you go into to the vault of the Concord Free Public Library, it's a long word, why don't you also look into where he camped? And I thought, Alec always has extra work, He'll be very supportive, but then he also comes up with extra work. As a matter of fact, I invited him to this talk. I would have picked him up, but he had something else. It was a conflict. But he immediately said, I wonder what fire they were watching, because when they were camping on the island, they saw a glow in the distance, and it seemed like there was a fire somewhere. Now Alec wants me to find out what burned in Lowell. But anyway, so Alec made me look up where did he camp. So I thought, okay, let me just go to the library and find out where he camped. Well, the library didn't know exactly where he camped. There were some maps. And also when I contacted authors that had done, for example, deep travel in the wake on the Concord and Merrimack by Mr. Leff, I securely read this book. I asked the man, do you know exactly where Fox Island was? Because he tried to replicate the trip. So he went with his son from Concord through Billerica, and they camped at Vietnam Veterans Park. And I thought, well, that's not even an island. Fox Island is an island, even though it's an island in spring only. So he said, no, I don't really know where it is. So any kind of author I found, Thoreau Society, nobody knew where exactly was this island. So I had my work cut out for me. I found a map, and it has the campsites all the way up to the White Mountains where he went. But I tried to just get this part. It's a detail of Thoreau's map of his 1839 excursion on the Concord and Merrimack rivers with his brother John. Campsites in Billerica, so that is right here. This is Billerica, Concord, Bedford, Billerica, Carlisle, Tewksbury. So I thought, okay, let me blow that one up. Now I see nothing anymore. So the campsite was here. Well, that's not very clear. That didn't help. So he traveled on August 31st, 1839. And September 1st, he was also in Billerica. And the rest of the days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we really don't care because he's out of Billerica. The dory and the maps we've seen, but now there's another map that came with a book with the week on the Concord and Merrimack rivers. It shows Concord. This is the big, I don't know how often you've canoed or kayaked the river. This is a clear angle, and then there's the angle here by the Two Brothers Rocks. This is what we know is the 225 bridge, and this is what we know is Route 4, Nashua Road, and then here it writes Saturday Camp. This little lake here, that's Nuttings, and then Mill Brook comes through that, Technology Park, and then by Dudley Road, it enters the Concord River. So I had a little bit more, and this is Page's Brook. Here you get Winning Pond and Dolly Brook. Anyway, this was a clearer map. I knew a little bit more, but I was still walking in the dark, really. Now, this is a map from the Billerica Conservation and Recreation brochures, and this is from the Carlisle Conservation. And sometimes I do walks in Carlisle and I go to Greeno Land. You can come in from River Edge Road. You know Riverview Restaurant, that's River Edge Road. You go all the way to the end, and then there's a trailhead and a fascinating barn, and it's the Greeno Barn, which is sort of by number 4, and then we walk number 5, and if the water of the river is not too high, you can follow the Blue Trail, River Trail. This year the water was way too high. But so there were years that we could walk the Blue Trail, and then I'd get there to the end. You can walk a little bit further. And I describe it in my article in the Thoreau Society Bulletin. Well, running a weekly winter walks program in Billerica, I sometimes, due to storms, do multiple pre-treks to ensure a seamless event. And the trail tangent in Carlisle's Greeno Land drew me out several times one week. to a captivating spot. There was like a magical spot at the end of that blue trail there. And the view arrested me. Later, at that same attractive area, with 30 followers in tow, I pointed across the river. For orientation purposes, so people know where they are, if we'd go from here as the crow flies, we'd find Great Meadows Refuge. But we can't see it because there's sort of a dividing ridge, a little rising ground, and that's when a transcendental sprite sprung it upon me. Thoreau was there, because Thoreau writes about a sandy rising. Yeah, that was an assumption. Now I had to prove that. So you can see, if you see the two maps from where we were looking and what we were looking at, the green is Great Meadows National Wildlife Refuge. Then there's dark green spots. Those are islands that are islands in spring only. And the gray rectangle is a privately owned island. And that privately owned island, I thought, would be Fox Island. Where's my notes? Here. Now I had to prove that. So I knew from the story that he went 7 miles. Just follow the images here. So this shows a little bit closer how I could have seen the island from the Carlisle trails with the magical moment. While I was writing the article, the editor said, "Do you have a photo of the island?" And in the winter time, I told my husband, "Get the canoe out of the basement. We need to get a photo of the island." So that's what we did here. You can see the survey markers at different corners of that island. So I know it's that gray spot on the map. This is an old map that shows the island here. And Maryknoll Cemetery is now the Daughters of St. Paul. There used to be camps, they called it, camps, in the 1900s. And I found kettles also as proof. The camps themselves are all gone, but sometimes you find leftovers from people camping, and they would have canoes. This is by Riverhurst, where they had a boathouse. There is even an older photo where the boathouse was smaller, so this is 1912. This is not because of Valentine's Day, but because there is a book about canoes that says early postcards documented the scandalous canoodling craze that took place on lakes and rivers in the Midwest and Eastern United States, including Billerica. So that's what all these boat landings, Riverhurst, Billerica, are about. You see that round thing, that shows Jug Island. Jug Island is mentioned in Thoreau's book. Some people say Jug Island is Thoreau's island. And actually, there are famous photos by Herbert Werner Gleason, and I found those photos when I visited the vault in Concord, and he claimed Jug Island was the island. However, Henry David writes a week in a lot of pages, so he has a lot of descriptions in it. And he says on Saturday they camp at Fox Island, he calls it. And then on Sunday they continue, and then they see Grape Island. In another book he says Grape Island, which I sometimes call Jug Island. So you know, Jug Island is not Fox Island. So then you sort of scratch things off. And the reason that they could canoe, this was a time where the mill people got more free time, more money. So they had time for their scandalous canoodling. There was one young man who bought the island from Stearns, and that's information I got from Alec. It was called The Island. I thought that was telling, that it was called the island where Thoreau was. Anyway, so this all happened 100 years after Thoreau. It's a summer destination. There was free time. There was spending money, and Old Town Canoe was mass-produced. It made canoes strong, sturdy, easy to buy. So there was in 1906. The island was bought from Stearns. This is the Gleason photo, which is Jug Island. That is not the island where he spent time. This is the story where at Hill's Bridge is after Fox Hill. That's Route 4, our Route 4. He then, I just Googled it for Billerica. Billerica, the quiet town back then, and see its rural spire rising above the trees, many handsome elm tops, all dead by Dutch elm disease, but the groves of elms are visible in Billerica. There is a fine grove of elms about the first house of the Atkins boathouse, which I don't know where that is. Jug Island is a peculiar one, the only one of the kind that I know in the river, except the small one at the falls. It's a rocky island. The island where he camped was not a rocky island. More proof that Jug Island was not the island where he camped. This was in the book Wild Fruits. He writes that Jug Island, which I once called Grape Island. So, and that's Billerica, Jug Island, Grape Island. That's another proof. Grape Island, Jug Island is not Fox Island. Here you get the blow-up of the Saturday camp with the Page's Brook across from it. Now, while they were camped, and I could read that, the sun was setting on the one hand, while our eminence was contributing its shadow to the night on the other. It seemed insensibly to grow lighter as the night shut in, and a distant and solitary farmhouse was revealed, which before lurked in the shadows of the noon. There was no other house in sight, nor any cultivated field. So I look up old maps, and I wonder, what are the two brothers looking at? When we had pitched our tents on the hillside, a few rods from the shore, we sat looking through its triangular door in the tent, in the twilight, looking at the lonely mass on the shore, just seen above the alders, and hardly yet come to a standstill from the swaying of the stream. So that's what they're looking at. And then they saw that house. So I look on old maps, which house were they looking at? And it turns out that Mr. Page had bought the house from Solomon Andrews, who had a grist mill on Page's Brook. Okay, I guess Page gave the name to the brook. So the farmhouse on Page's Brook is what they were looking at, which matches with me seeing the island from Greenough land, because Page sold the land to the Greenoughs, and the Greenoughs gave it to the Conservation Commission. And now check the time. Oh, the time is here. Okay, let's move on. Oh, there, I'm pointing an arrow to Jug Island. There's only one such rocky island. The other arrow goes to the island that is an island in the spring only, Saturday Camp. Oh, this is me and Mr. Thoreau himself by the replica of his cabin by Walden Pond. And this is my study material, a week on the Concord and Merrimack Rivers. The Thoreau Gazetteer has the maps and deep travel. Mr. Leff, who actually attended my talk in Concord, and the canoe book about the canoodling, which I didn't bring, too heavy. Then I also used the Two Brothers Rock's National Register history. Alec put a lot of work into that one. And then there was an article in the New Yorker about the trip. The editor of the Thoreau Society Bulletin, he said my story was a Thoreauvian novelty. So I'm the one who invented where it's private land, so you can't go there. So maybe there are questions about Thoreau in Billerica, because I know too much about it to limit myself. They didn't start until like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, so they had to find a camp quite soon.
So is this a one-way trip? I mean, they go...
Oh, speaking of that, yeah, the last day, he got tired of riding, I think. We had made about 50 miles this day, with sail and oar, and now, far in the evening, our boat was grating against the bulrushes of its native port, and its keel recognized the Concord mud, where some semblance of its outline was still preserved in the flattened flags, which is another plant. So he was tired of riding. He talks about 6 miles in a long story, and the last day, 50 miles done. And I think I have that described here too. Reportedly sailing and rowing 50 miles in a single day on the return journey with what must have been a brisk northerly tailwind, there was no need for the brothers to camp in Billerica during the rapid passage back to Concord. In reality, they were on vacation for 2 weeks, and he put the story in 1 week. But I do think they started really on August 31st, with September 1st being the second day. Other than that, I don't know. And then his brother, John, nicked himself shaving, got tetanus, died of it. And that happened, I think, in 1842, which John really had trouble with processing that he lost his brother. A number of years later, he had trouble with not having his brother. So he thought, I'm going to write a book about our trip, and it's kind of a tribute to his brother. He wrote that in 45, 47, 2 years and 2 months, 1845, 1847, and then he had trouble getting it published. And once it was published, nobody bought it. So it was all in his attic. So he would write about having a huge library, most of the books, his own. He gets a lot of attention, but I'm trying to move the attention from Concord to Billerica.
Well, I heard there's whitewater between the Talbot Mills and the Merrimack.
Yes, you can raft it.
Is it along the path?
Yeah, and it's if you were to go to Lawrence Street by the cemetery, there's a Lowell Cemetery, and there's a good trail, walking trail, ADA accessible, with an ADA accessible bridge. But it's by that trail that the whitewater rafting starts. Then you can take a bridge and go to the other side, and you can see the raging river right beneath you. If there's enough water, with the hike group, I announced that you could sign up for this whitewater rafting. So some of us did. We actually had one raft full, 6 of us, and then there was, I think, 1 or 2 other rafts, but we had signed up, and then it stopped raining, and then the water just drops, and there has to be a minimum flow for the thing to happen, or they call it off. So they called me and they said, yeah, you signed up with a lot of people. Would you like to move the date, or would you like to cancel it altogether? And I said, no, it's going to rain. And we're going to rain dance, and you keep that date, we're going to go. Sure enough, I put on Facebook, rain dance, everybody, rain dance. And everybody rain danced, and we got a lot of rain. And it had to be, I think, between, but as long as it didn't get over 2,400 cubic feet per second. So, and you can look that up online. So it was, I think, at 2,000 or 2,100, so we had good flow. And everybody gets a rubber suit and life vest and helmet, and it's a lot of fun. Yeah.
So earlier in your presentation, maybe that's how Thoreau did the 6 miles per hour.
No, but because he didn't do the falls. He got out by the Billerica Falls, and he went on the canal. And then from the canal, it takes you to the Merrimack, which passes all the falls of the Concord and the heavy falls of the Merrimack. So where he went in is opposite of Bellegarde, the boathouse, by Pawtucket Boulevard. And then he went upstream, and if that's quite something too, to keep paddling upstream to the White Mountains. But I think at that time there was, by other falls, also canals to go around the falls. They don't all exist anymore, I don't think.
Yeah, it's quite too bad they didn't pull fish dams all the way up.
Yeah.
You said the Fox Island was privately owned. Is there any markers on it, like when you're on the river?
Nothing.
Recognize it, nothing?
Nothing, yeah, and that's a pity. I would like to have, and it would be a great place to have a platform so you can camp, and to have some kind of marker to prove that he was there. It is privately owned. They pay taxes on it. Maybe one day, if maybe I have to just ask every year, and then finally they'll, not that I'm going to buy it, but Great Meadows or Sudbury Valley trustees, I'll have it in the open space and recreation plan. But Billerica shouldn't buy all the open space. Carlisle has a lot of open space, and then it's the Fish and Wildlife that buys the land. So we could try and get the state or the Fed or some land trust, if they buy it, then it's protected for our benefit, and we don't have to pay. Taxpayer doesn't have to pay for it. That's what I'm hoping for. So if you wanted to paddle it, so we put it that way.
No, walking
Well, walking.
from Route 4.
Yeah, from Route 4, if you were to walk into the Great Meadows,
Yeah.
and you keep going, it's kind of a winding path, and then at some point, so you're on the between the Daughters of St. Paul land and the Great Meadows.
Yeah.
There is a path that seems to go straight to the river, and it is a causeway that was created by the Maryknoll Fathers so they could go boating. And if you go at the end of that path, you stand and you can see the river,
Yeah.
and on your right is the island. So if it's dry enough, you could cross it.
Okay. Because I used to go walking back there,
Yeah,
behind the Marylknolls, behind
Yeah.
their property.
yes, yeah.
But-
And it's right there. There is one path that goes straight, it's a path, and it goes straight to the river. And there's only one of those.
I've been on that.
Yeah, so then it's almost a stone's throw away on your right.
See, I didn't even know what I was looking
Right.
at.
Yeah, yeah, and it's an interesting spot. And if you're paddling there's another island closer to, say, the Yamaha place. You can probably see the Yamaha place from that place. It has a foundation, it has a chimney, and that's Great Meadows land. But then if you go further upstream, you come to the island where Thoreau was, and you can see some foundation remains too, very little, but that was definitely not there when Thoreau was there. Yeah, so you've seen it.
Yeah.
And you might have even walked, because if the river is low enough, you can walk right up to it. But now the river is high, you can't even walk in the Greeno land. Well, the recording is going to be way too long for people with short attention spans. I'm happy to edit it, Nancy.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, Marlies.
Thank you. Who runs the men's club now? Because it's not you anymore, right?
It's Skip.
Skip does it. Oh, okay.